All right, Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Welcome to our session. We'll be recording this session for Al-Mawrid, Canada. Today, we have an esteemed guest, Dr. Saqib Hussain. I'll shortly ask him to introduce himself, and we will be discussing with him his paper on verse 34 of Surah Nisa, which has, a lot of controversy around it. He has taken a particular position on it in one of his papers, so we'll discuss that with him. Let me quickly switch over to Dr. Saqib, if you can kindly introduce yourself.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Reza. Thank you to Modis for the invitation. So I'm Dr. Saqib Hussain. I am assistant professor here in Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount University. Before that, I was completing my postgraduate and then doctoral research at the University of Oxford from 2016 to 2022, which was in the Quran, particularly, more specifically, the term hikmah in the Quran, what hikmah in the Quran might mean. And before that, I was studying in the Middle East for a while, in Damascus, first of all, and then in Cairo for several years. So I have some background in traditional Islamic studies, but for the past several years, I've primarily been focusing on the Western academic study of Islam, and more particularly the Quran.
All right, thank you very much. So with that, I'll also introduce my co-panelist, Ahmed Shoaib. He's a student of Quranic Arabic and the Quran, and he'll be helping me with the discussion on this topic. So over to you, Dr. Saqib, if you can show your presentation and take us through it.
Sure. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me try to set up share screen with you. Is that working okay? Yeah, all good? Okay,
All good. Go ahead.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin al-Amin. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa ba'd. So Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So this presentation is based on a paper that I wrote, which was published a few years ago. I think it was 2001. It was published, maybe 2020. I don't recall. In the Journal of Quranic Studies. The paper is available as it's in the public domain. It's available to download from the Journal of Quranic Studies website. So if you want to look into it in more detail, it's available there for you to look at. The paper looks at, as Reza was saying, ayah number 34 in Surah Nisa, and there's several aspects of the ayah that the paper investigates, but here, over the course of this presentation, about half an hour or so, we'll just look at one aspect, as I'll try to make clear. If we have more time, we can think about some other aspects of the paper as well. So let's look at the verse itself, the ayah in translation. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So Ar-Rijalu Qawwamuna ala Nisa. So men are Qawwamun, are women. I'm leaving that term untranslated. Through God having favored one over the other, and through their spending from their wealth. Therefore, righteous women are qanitat. I'm again leaving that term untranslated. Guarding in their husband's absence, because God has guarded them. And this is the part that we'll be investigating over the next 30 minutes or so. As for those whose nushuz you fear, admonish them and leave them in their beds and strike them. Then if they obey you, seek not a way against them. Truly God is exalted and great. So the paper itself looks at the meanings of the three untranslated terms, Qawwamun, Qanitat, and Nushuz. We can maybe discuss that, maybe we'll have a chance to look at that, but primarily over this presentation, we'll be looking at this third untranslated term in bold, Nushuz, as for those whose Nushuz you fear. So the traditional understanding of what Nushuz means is that it's some form of rebellion against the husband's authority, and more particularly, the fuqaha think of it in terms of either a wife's sexual refusal, so she refuses to make herself sexually available to the husband, or it's absconding without his permission, so leaving the house without his permission. That's the traditional way to understand it, and that's often supported by the following clause being, then if they obey you, ata'nakum. So, that contrast between nushuz and the punishment for nushuz on the one hand, and then on the other hand, if they obey you, ata'nakum, seems to suggest that these two things are opposites of one another, right? So if they do nushuz, then you do this, but if they obey you, then do this. So that seems to suggest that they're opposite to each other, and that leads us to, it led the ulama to believe that nushuz must be therefore some sort of disobedience, right? If they're opposite to one another. This ayah attracted a lot of attention amongst the mufassirun, and clearly in the present day and age, it attracts even greater scrutiny, and it's I try and address some of the issues around that ayah that I wrote this particular paper. Okay, so let's look first of all at nushuz itself in the Quran. If we're trying to understand what this word means, let's look at where it occurs in the Quran and what we can determine about what it might mean from the context of its appearance. So it only occurs twice. One of those occurrences we just looked at, it's verse 34, as for those whose nushuz you fear, وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ, and it's the feminine plural, right? So it's clearly talking about women, wives, those whose nushuz you fear. The second appearance of nushuz is in the same surah, later on in the same surah, verse 128. If a wife fears nushuz or desertion from her husband, right? Khafat nushuzan. If a wife fears nushuz or desertion from her husband. So the first thing to note here is that in both, and these are the only appearances of the term nushuz in the Quran. The first thing to note here is that the two instances of nushuz in the are very parallel to each other. Right? They're in the same surah, and the vocabulary around it, the phraseology surrounding it is there's echoes in the two phrases. So we have the idea of fearing nushuz, right? As for those whose nushuz you fear, if a wife fears nushuz. So you have the idea of fearing nushuz, and then you have this idea of, a husband fearing nushuz from his wife, a wife fearing nushuz from her husband. And then you have, this phenomenon, as I said, where it's the only time the word nushuz appears in the Quran, and in both instances it's in the same surah. So for all of those considerations, I think it's unlikely that nushuz has very different meanings in these two ayats, right? The fact that their constructions are so similar and the surah is the same and it's not a particularly common word, I think it's very unlikely that we have two different meanings. That's the first thing to note. The second thing to note is that the fact that fearing nushuz is mentioned in both of these ayat immediately suggests that the traditional understanding has to be incorrect, right? So if the traditional understanding is a wife sexually withholding herself from her husband, it's difficult to see how that can be expressed in terms of fearing nushuz. Is the ayah saying that if you fear that the wife will sexually withhold herself, then you do this? I mean, that kind of behavior is something that's manifest, something that the husband is confronted with, rather than something that he fears, right? So the vocabulary suggests that that's not what nushuz means. And again, the fact that the two ayat are similar to each other, again, suggests that the traditional understanding of nushuz is incorrect, because the traditional understanding of nushuz does not fit both ayat. And the third thing I think we can immediately note is that this is unlikely to be something vague, like, vague bad behavior, vague ill treatment, because in those sorts of instances, there's often a disagreement between the husband and wife, right? Who is responsible for a particular marital argument? Who is responsible for the marriage not working? This is nushuz, whatever it means, is likely to be quite specific. A specific fault that either spouse fears that the other spouse is engaged in. So all of those indications, as I say, point against the traditional understanding. And I'd like to hypothesize at this stage, and this is a hypothesis that we're going to test over the course of this presentation, that sexual infidelity fits really well here. Right? So if we understand nushuz to mean sexual infidelity, that fulfills all of the, or that meets all of the kind of problems that we've identified when looking at this word and its traditional definition, right? So if it refers to sexual infidelity, then that definition fits in both ayahs in 34 and 128. Sexual infidelity also is something that you can legitimately fear rather than something you're confronted with, right? Because it's something that's happening behind your back. And finally, sexual infidelity is something that both a husband and a wife might be guilty of, right? As a specific crime that might be both guilty of. So just looking at the use of nushuz in the Quran immediately, I think, suggests that that is a viable possibility for how we translate it. If we broaden our scope slightly and think about nushuz in pre-Islamic poetry, we have these lines. The sheikh bound her in marriage one night, so she became a lady of Qada'a, visiting soothsayers, being Nushiz. So my arrow headed for her, and it has before her pinched the likes of her from the women of the region, right? So this is by Al-Asha. So what he's describing, so a sheikh bound her in marriage. He's talking about some girl who's been bound into marriage with some tribal elder, some tribal leader, some old man that she's not happy about. It happened suddenly. And so she becomes a lady of Quda'a, she's part of the Quda'a tribe. But the fact that she's not happy about it is indicated by both by the poet using this term, that he bound her in marriage, suggesting confinement, right, suggesting that she's there against her will. And it's also suggested by the fact that she's visiting soothsayers, right, Kohan. She's trying to find some kind of ruse, some sort of supernatural way of getting out of this situation. And then it describes her as Nashis. So Nashis, as the lexicographers tell us, is just an alternative form of Nashiz. So this is someone who is guilty of Nushuz, right? And then immediately after she is described as Nashis, he says, my arrow headed for her, and it has before her pinched the likes of her from the women of the region. So he describes his seduction of this girl, of this woman, right? So he describes how he was able to engage in a relationship with her, establish a relationship with her. So even though it's true that she's Nashis before, she's described as being Nashis before the description of Al-Asha, the hero of the poem, having some sort of an affair with her, clearly the extramarital affair is linked to her being Nushuz, to her being Nashis. It's linked to her Nushuz in some way, right? So there's a link that's established that we'll think about. That's the first thing to notice. And the second thing to notice is that, again, the idea of disobedience is just not something that fits the use of Nashis in this verse, right? Whereas the idea of infidelity absolutely does fit, although it is true that she's described as being Nashis before the seduction takes place, and that's an idea we'll think about momentarily. Okay, what else do we have? We have, my wife became the darkness of the night, the basis of my household, and there's no doubt she is Nashis, recorded by Qutrub. So look, we have some interesting parallels with the Quran, the idea of there's no doubt about this, meaning that there's something hidden that's happening. The Quran talks about fear of nushuz. Here the poet talks about him having suspicions which are removed. And what is it that he discovers that she's been doing something in secret in the darkness of the night, which has made her the lowest individual in the household, the basest, the most reprehensible individual in the household. Again, sexual infidelity fits very well. There's no doubt, therefore, that she is Nushiz. It seems very likely here that Nushiz refers to her infidelity. And we have the same indications in early Islamic poetry. So those are both instances of pre-Islamic poetry. In early Islamic poetry, we have Bani Khaybari, desist from this foul speech that has come from you and see what its outcome is. For how many other Nashis we have, which once they leave, are slow to stop, right? By Adham ibn Abi Zara'a, an Umayyad era poet. So again, how do we understand Nashis here? He's using this word Nashis to refer to the lines of poetry that his tribe can direct at Bani Khaybari. So he's saying, Bani Khaybari, this foul speech that you're engaged in, desist from it, stop it, because if you don't, its outcome will be particularly bad for you. Because we have nashis that we can throw at you. We have nashis that are waiting to strike you. So again, if nashis means something like disobedience, it doesn't work. But if nashis means, if the metaphor is drawing on the idea of a woman who's eager to leave, then the imagery of the poetry works perfectly well, right? It works really well. So we have these, just like imagine a woman who's desperate to leave her husband. That's how desperate these verses are to leave us, to be expressed by us, and to hit you, therefore. Right? So all of the occurrences of nushuz in early Islamic poetry and in pre-Islamic poetry all point in the same direction. It seems in every case to be talking about it should be at the very least connected with the idea of sexual infidelity or of a woman wanting to leave her husband. If you come to the hadith, we have some several hadiths in which nushuz are mentioned. There are only a handful of hadith, however, in which there's a sufficient amount of context for us to determine what nushuz might mean in this hadith. So we have the hadith of Abdul Rahman ibn al-Zubayr al-Quradi, is recorded in Bukhari Sahih, and he's talking about his wife who wants to leave him and go back to Rifa'ah, and she's accused him of being impotent, and he protests. He says, "By God, a messenger of God, she has told a lie. I can satisfy her, so I'm not, sexually impotent. But she is nashiz. She wants to go back to Rifa'ah." All right. So he defines nushuz in this hadith as her wanting to leave him. Admittedly, again, not sexual infidelity, but still, it's connected very clearly to the wife wanting to leave the husband. Look at Abdullah ibn Awar in Ahmad's Musnad. The wife is explicitly in this hadith described as nashiz. Abdullah ibn Awar in the hadith, he's a merchant. He goes away on trade, and in his absence, his wife Mu'adha moves in with another man, and when he returns, he's willing to take his wife back, and he insists that he wants to forgive her. He says, by your life, addressing the Prophet ﷺ, my love for Mu'adha is not such that a mischief maker or time could change it, nor the evil she committed when deviant men made her slip when they were alone with her in my absence. So look, she's described explicitly as nushuz, and through the poetry that Abdullah ibn al-Awad recites to express kind of his love for it seems suggestive of what it was that had happened in his absence. So again, nushuz seems pretty clearly, I think, to be connected to in some form of infidelity. I would say that for these hadiths, I'm not making the case, and I try to emphasize this in the paper, I'm not making the case that we should understand what nushuz means through the use of these hadith. What I am saying is that, regardless of the authenticity of these hadiths, whether one thinks of them as being traceable back to the Prophet ﷺ or as, first century or second century Hijri texts, what is clear is that in early Islam, the use of this word nushuz clearly meant something different to what the fuqaha eventually insisted on, that it means that it means kind of sexually withholding herself or leaving the house without his permission. It clearly was tied in pre-Islamic poetry, early Islamic poetry, in the Hadith, to this idea of the woman wanting to leave her husband, or even more specifically to infidelity. This may be clearest in the farewell pilgrimage, Hajjat al-Wada', when the Prophet says that if your wives commit a clear sexual transgression, fahisha mubayyina, what should you do? Leave their beds, fahjuruhunna fil madaji', and strike them, wadribuhunna, not severely, ghayra mubarrihin. Then if they obey you, seek not a way against them. La tabghu alayhinna sabila. So the vocabulary of this hadith clearly echoes the ayah that we are considering, right? It talks about fahjuruhunna fil madaji' wadribuhunna ata'nakum la tabghu alayhinna sabila. All of that is clearly quoting the ayah that we're looking at. But the bit that's different is the first part of the hadith. So instead of talking about nushuz, it just uses the terms fahisha mubayyina, a clear sexual transgression. So it seems that what happened in the hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ, or a later narrator, or whoever put this hadith in circulation, is just replacing one word with its synonym, right? It's the exact same hadith, but instead of talking about nushuz, the hadith makes it clear what that nushuz entails, what that nushuz involves. Then that nushuz is fahisha mubayyina, it's clear sexual transgression, right? Because the rest of the hadith, beat by beat, is exactly the same as the ayah that we're considering. This is the first part of the hadith, instead of using the word nushuz, uses fahisha mubayyina, showing us that these two things are synonymous. So I think all of that literature and considerations of the use of the word nushuz in the Quran point us in the same direction, that it's talking about sexual infidelity. But if that is the case, then we have to look at this particular ayah alongside other ayat in the Quran that talk about sexual infidelity, right? We can't look at it in isolation. If you're thinking about the Quran's legal position against sexual infidelity, then we have to bring into consideration all of the places in the Quran where this issue arises. So there are several. We can list some of them here. We've got the verse under consideration. As for those whose nushuz you fear, admonish them, leave them in their beds, and strike them. We have earlier in the same surah, as for those of your women who commit an indecency, sorry about the typo there, an indecency, call 4 witnesses among you to bear witness against them, again, some sort of sexual infidelity or sexual transgression at least. And the next ayah in the same surah, and if 2 of those among you are guilty of fahisha, then hurt them both. So all of that was from Surah Nisa, and then Surah An-Nur also discusses the issue of sexual indecency. It's not necessarily infidelity, but it is sexual indecency. As for the Zani and the Zani, flog them each 100 lashes. And again, as for those who accuse their wives and have no witnesses but themselves, we can look at that last verse in more detail. As for those who accuse their wives and have no witnesses but themselves, then the testimony of one of them shall be 4 testimonies, swearing by God that he is among the truthful, and the 5th shall be that the curse of God be upon him if he is among the liars, and the punishment shall be averted from her should she give 4 testimonies, swearing by God that he is among the liars, and the 5th, that God's wrath shall come upon her if he is among the truthful. Surah An-Nur, verse 6. So all of, we have these, we have a range of verses spread across Surah An-Nisa and Surah An-Nur, which deal with this issue of either sexual infidelity or some form of sexual indecency. So if we look at them in parallel, these 2 surahs, what we find is that in Surah An-Nisa we have an expression or a legislation of the 4 witness rule, right? So as for those of your women who commit an indecency, call 4 witnesses among you to bear witness against them. So this is it seems, the idea that 4 witnesses are required, this is the place in the Quran, in Surah Nisa, where that rule is articulated. By the time you get to Surah An-Nur, that rule is assumed, and the community is reminded of the rule. As for those who accuse chaste women, but then do not bring four witnesses, right? So those people are to be punished. Why are they to be punished? Because the four witness rule had already been stated. So we see here a couple of things. Firstly, there's a strong indication here that Surah An-Nisa came before Surah An-Nur. Just chronologically, it's earlier, because Surah An-Nur seems to be referring to a law that had been passed in Surah An-Nisa. So Surah An-Nisa seems to be earlier. And secondly, Surah An-Nur is building on Surah An-Nisa, right? It's taking a rule and reminding the community of it and articulating punishments for those who contravene the rule, right? Those who go against the legislation. Similarly, we see the same move where in Surah An-Nisa we had فَأَذُوهُمَا, hurt them both. What does that mean? That the two parties guilty of fahisha should both be hurt? That's clarified in Surah An-Nur. The vague punishment, azuhuma, hurt them, is made very precise in Surah An-Nur. The Surah An-Nur punishment is that if you have four witnesses, there should be 100 lashes, and there'll be this curse ritual if the husband can't meet the four witness rule, right? So that very vague azuhuma is made very precise in Surah An-Nur. So all I'm arguing, I think nothing over here is controversial. I think this is sort of widely accepted in Islamic scholarship. This sort of relationship between these various ayat. What I'm arguing is that we should include in this our striking verse, azuhuma, fadribuhunna, right? That also is a vague rule relating to a sexual indecency committed by one party, in this case, the wife. And that vague rule is made precise in Surah An-Nur. Just like azuhuma, hurt them both, everyone agrees that's made precise in Surah An-Nur. Similarly, strike them is made precise in Surah An-Nur, right? We have the four witnesses, the 100 lashes, and the curse which was the husband can't meet the four witness rule. So that means that Nushuz, the way to think about it in the Quran, if we bring those two surahs into consideration together, is that if the husband suspects that the wife is nashiza, she's guilty of nushuz, he warns her. And then, if the evidence increases, he abandons sexual relations with her. The ayah doesn't explicitly talk about the evidence increasing, but I think given the structuring of the ayah, one punishment after another, increasing in severity, I think it's a reasonable inference that the increase in severity of the punishment articulated in the ayah relates to an ongoing fear and perhaps an increase in evidence. And then if the evidence increases yet further, she is struck. But crucially, Surah An-Nur now makes clear that she is struck if there are four witnesses, and they're mutually cursed if the husband cannot provide four witnesses. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at rabbinic law, so Mishnah Sotah, this is a early rabbinic text, a book of Jewish law put together by the rabbis. We have a very similar situation. This is a text that's put together maybe 400 years or so before the Quran. And the rabbis also considered this situation. What do you do in cases of fears of sexual infidelity? So they said, he should warn her, but how does he warn her? He says to her in front of two witnesses, do not speak with that man, right? And if she does speak to him, she is still permitted to her husband. But if she enters a private place with this man, right, the husband is sort of concerned about, and stayed with him for a time sufficient for her to be defiled by having sexual intercourse with him, then she is forbidden to her husband. If she says, I'm defiled to you, she gives him a receipt for a ketuvah, this is the marriage contract, and goes out with a get. But if she says, I am pure, right, if she says, I'm pure, then the text goes on to articulate that if she insists that she did not have sexual relations with her husband, then the matter is brought to a judicial inquiry, and there's again a mutual curse ritual, or excuse me, not a mutual curse, but there's a curse ritual that's pronounced against the woman. So just to summarize that, the issue of the Sotah, this is the term that the rabbis use, the Jews use, for a woman who's suspected of sexual infidelity. To summarize what we just read in the Jewish legal text, that if the husband suspects the wife is Sotah, that she's not being faithful, he warns her, and then as the evidence increases, he abandons sexual relations with her, and if she refuses to confess to the curse ritual. So there's a very clear kind of parallelism between these two cases, the rabbinic case of the Sotah and the Quranic case of the Nushiz. In both cases, the beginning of the first step is that the husband should warn the woman in question, his wife. The next step in both instances is that he abandons sexual relations with her. The third step for the Sotah is a priestly cursing ritual. So the priest in the high temple pronounces a curse upon the woman if she has been unfaithful, right? So it's a conditional curse. Just like in the Quran, we have, if there are no four witnesses, a communal mutual cursing ritual. The difference is that if there are four witnesses, she is beaten according to Surah An-Nur, i.e. she is to be lashed. The Sotah legislation only covers suspicions of adultery and not actual establishment of adultery. I think the final thing to say before we sort of wrap up is, who is this right to strike, the right to hit the woman given to in the Quran? Because if my argument holds, then it would seem that the fadribuhunna, strike them, if we understand that in light of Surah An-Nur, then Surah An-Nur is clearly talking about a judicial process, right? It's talking about the community, an appropriate legislative and executive body in the community punishing the Zani and the Zania. But then that would also have to apply to the Nashiza. But yet, that's not how Surah An-Nur has traditionally been, Surah Nisa, verse 34 has traditionally been understood. It's traditionally been understood that the fadribuhunna is permission that's given to the husband. And I would suggest that that's not at all obvious if you look at the ayah itself. So if you look at how it begins, the first part of the ayah is talking about husbands and wives, about men and women. Men are qawwamun of women, therefore righteous women are qanitat. Right? Third person. If you look at the ayah that follows, it's talking again about husbands and wives. If you fear a breach between them two, right? The you is clearly the community, and the them two are the husband and wife. Then appoint an arbiter from his people and an arbiter from her people, right? Again, the husband and wife are spoken of in the third person as absent parties. So then it's not at all clear that the you here, as for those whose nushuz you fear, that should be a direct address to the husbands anymore, right? Because immediately before it, the husband and wife are spoken of in the third person. Immediately after it, they're spoken of in the third person. Again, after it, we have this vocabulary of fear, you fear, and that's clearly addressed to the community. So why should we not understand that the khafuna in verse 34, the part of verse 34 which speaks about nushuz, is also being addressed to the community. Those whose nushuz you as a community fear, this is what you as a community should do. And in fact, again, if you look at the hadith, it's really interesting. The hadith seems to support this reading. So Umar ibn Khattab took a Nashiz woman, admonished her, but she did not accept what was good for her, so he imprisoned her in a building which had a lot of dung for 3 days, then took her out and said, "What do you think?" She said, "O commander of the believers, no, by God, I have not found repose except these 3 days. So Umar said, "Divorce her, curse you, even by her treasure of dowry," reporting Abdul Razak's Musannaf. So if you look at the hadith, it's really interesting, because what's interesting about it is that it is an approach to nushuz which seems to go against the traditional understanding, against the understanding of the fuqaha, but is entirely in keeping with the reading that I'm presenting here, which is that the consequences of this fear of nushuz are not carried out by the husband. It's carried out entirely by the leader of the community. Even the extent of wa'az is carried out by him. The wa'az is carried out by him. The separation between the husband and the wife is also carried out by him. And there's no final step. There's no final step, which again would make sense if there were an absence of witnesses. So we can conclude by saying that nushuz probably means a desire to leave your husband, right? So I think based on the texts that we've seen, its meaning in Arabic was probably the meaning that fits is a strong desire to leave the husband. That was its initial use. And then it's used euphemistically in the Quran to refer to sexual infidelity, right? Both in the Quran and in early Islamic literature to refer to sexual infidelity, like lamasa in the Quran. Lamasa is to touch, but that same verb to touch is also used to have a sexual relationship. Nushuz means for a wife to leave her husband, but just as in English we talk about a wife running away, that often has the connotations of cheating on the husband. So the correct meaning of the term is retained. It's retained in Hadith. We find it in pre-Islamic poetry. We find it in early Islamic poetry, and we find it despite the fiqh and tafsir tradition. This is, I think, an important point to note, right? So very often what we see is that hadith are put into hadith are adduced by different fiqh parties to support their positions, which leads to a suspicion that hadith are maybe being fabricated in the early community to just support whatever fiqh positions the different parts of the community have. So the Kufans have their hadith, and the Basrans have their hadith, and so on. But here you have a hadith which doesn't support anyone's position, right? So it's not easy to see why anyone would fabricate it. It suggests that the hadith is ancient, that it's recording a genuine understanding of what nushuz was, despite whatever the fuqaha were interpreting it to be. And then the case of the Nashid's wife being parallel to the Sotah, the kind of the clear parallelisms between those two legal cases means that we should probably understand them in the same way. And if the Sotah is the suspected adulteress, the Nashiz is also the suspected adulteress, except of course the Quran expands it to include the husband in its use of the term. So it talks about the suspected adulterer. And again, both the vocabulary of the Quran in terms of whom it's addressing and its parallelism with the Sotah ritual suggests that the Quran is speaking about a judicial process rather than giving the husband the right to beat the wife. We didn't have time to look into this today, but in the paper itself, I also discuss what Qawwamun means and argue that Qawwamun is placing a financial obligation of maintaining the family on the husband, and not making him the head of the household who is to be obeyed. It's simply talking about financial responsibility, nothing more. And that there's nothing in Surah Nisa verse 34 actually that talks about a wife's obedience or the necessity of a wife's obedience to the husband. If we understand nushuz to mean sexual infidelity, and fear of nushuz is something that the husband is having to encounter, having to deal with, then the way to understand the end of this ayah, if they obey you, is if they obey you in this regard, if they obey you in desisting from those actions, those activities which have resulted in this fear of nushuz. Right, so that's the obedience that the ayah talks about, and nothing besides. So I will stop there. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to engaging with you.
All right, thank you very much. So yes, you identified that in this presentation you didn't discuss the issue of obedience. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, obedience. Yes, because you were saying that as you say in your paper, that you side with the third possibility, which is only financial responsibility, and the other first two possibilities are authority plus financial responsibility and only authority, right?
Right.
So we'll touch on that topic as well. So I'll just like to kind of start off this discussion. First, I'd like to ask you, why did you choose this specific verse? I mean, why go and dig into this specific verse? What prompted you? Go ahead.
So it's actually a confluence of circumstances that made me look into it. It was not something I intended to look at. I was focused quite squarely on getting my dissertation done on time, hikmah in the Quran. But because I was looking, when I was trying to understand what hikmah in the Quran means, I was looking at Jewish traditions and Christian traditions about wisdom, and what they understood by hikmah. So I was, reading a lot of Jewish literature, and I came across the issue of the Sotah, this issue in rabbinic law of the suspected adulteress. And as soon as you read it, the parallels with Nushuz are immediate. They're just so evident. And I wasn't aware that anyone had written on it. And then I just started looking into it a little bit, and very quickly found some texts that I thought again seemed to confirm the suspicion that Nushuz and Sotah are both speaking about the same thing. So yeah, it was just a chance accident. While researching one thing, I found another, and I ended up doing some research and writing about it. And it was actually, I remember it was in just at the start of Ramadan, I think in 2018, when this happened, and it was over the course of about a month or so that I did all the research and wrote the first draft of the paper, which was unusual. It was a very blessed time, because normally it takes me a lot longer than that to even write a coherent paragraph. But yeah, that's how it happened.
All right. So yeah, that sounds interesting. Basically, you were studying something else, and within that, you kind of landed on this, and you suddenly kind of a bulb lit up in your head, and you say, okay,
Right,
yeah,
exactly that.
this sounds like a parallel with something in the Quran. Okay, so makes sense. Makes sense. So this verse, of course, is the center of a lot of controversy. Primarily three words in there. Number one, Qawwam, number two, Nushuz, and number three, Wadribuhunna, right? So this is where so much debate and discussion happens. You write in your paper that the classical position, the majority classical position, has been what is generally understood by these three words. But we notice that later in modern scholars come along, especially earlier period of the 20th century, right? Modernist scholars start interpreting it differently. Also, feminist scholars have also kind of stepped into this. They've started interpreting it differently as well. So when you were writing this paper, or when you were looking into this topic, did you go to them? Did you look at their point of views, and did you, let's say, formulate your point of view in kind of with some reference to them at all, or you were primarily concerned with what you saw in your study of the Mishnah, and then what you saw in the Quran, and only the parallel that you saw over there, and only on the linguistic aspects?
So I have to say that this was unusual in that usually the way I think most researchers proceed, the way I proceed as well, is that um, it's secondary literature. You normally do an exhaustive study of the secondary literature, and you see what's already been written and what the various positions are, and who's staked out what position in the field, and then you think about whether what you agree with, what you disagree with, and how you can contribute to that discussion. And that is roughly how I think things work. Certainly for me, I think that's usually how it works. This was really unusual for me because I found all of the primary texts that I wanted to use in my discussion of this paper almost immediately before I looked at the secondary literature. So the poetry, the hadith, the rabbinic material, I found them, and they hadn't been discussed anyway. So even if I started with the secondary literature, I wouldn't have found this material. But because I found this so early and so quickly, I had in my mind exactly the argument I wanted to make. So my sort of mental draft of what this paper would look like was sort of complete almost before I touched any secondary literature. But then when I did look at secondary literature, whether it's sort of early and medieval tafsir or sort of modern tafsir, modern feminist writings, Kisha Ali and Amina Wadud, Asma Afsruddin, Barlas, just I try to be Karen Bauer, both Muslim scholars and non-Muslim scholars, Khalid Abul Fadl. So I could see that there were ideas similar to this floating around, but they were I felt personally they were unconvincingly argued, and they sort of had an air of apologetics to them, kind of an embarrassment with the traditional position. And so what can we do to look at this verse differently? And that wasn't very appealing to me. I mean, I'm not commenting on any one of these individual scholars. I think that a lot of the writings that they did, a lot of the work that they really wasn't along the apologetic lines. They really helped me to clarify my own thinking about the surah, about the verse in question. But yeah, all of that sort of came after I had my basic argument in place.
Right. So that sounds interesting. It seems like you primarily approach this from primary sources point of view. You saw how these words were used, how similar phrases appeared in different places, and then you kind of constructed your own theory. And it seems like your interpretation is using like a mix of things here. For example, in the case of Qawwam, you are saying that you are going with a minority position, which is only financial responsibility. It is entirely possible that a feminist might disagree with even that,
Sure.
a line of argument or even that interpretation. With Nushuz, you have almost, it seems like, strictly gone with sexual infidelity as the reason, right? But with Wadribuhunna, you are sticking to strike them, right? So over there you are not changing the meaning. A lot of modernist or feminist writers might actually not use the strike word. They might use something else to separate and go away. For example, I was reading how Laila Bakhtiar has translated, and she said, well, I could not accept this. So when she translated it, she translated as go away from them, right? Or some people say
I just didn't find like any of that convincing.
Right.
I think Wadribuhunna clearly means strike them. I can understand the motivation and the anxiety around the verse, and I think a lot of people who've seen my interpretation are more comfortable with it. A lot of them think that it doesn't go far enough. But for me, I mean, I'm trying to understand what the verse means. And to just see where I land in terms of kind of a close reading of the text, whether it kind of aligns with a particular kind of a modern sensibility or is removed from it is
irrelevant to you.
It's somewhat irrelevant. Yeah, I mean, it's a secondary issue.
All right. Okay. So
I'll be honest. If I genuinely thought that the verse meant that husbands have that the Quran is giving husbands permission to strike their wives, I'd say that. I would say that, and I would just say, like several of the Mufassirun did, that Qurtubi and Karen Bauer brings this out, that Qurtubi notes that look, there are certain classes of women where this won't help. So he clearly understands the verse as trying to bring about some sort of reconciliation between husband and wife, and he just then uses his common sense reasoning that if doing this is going to cause further division between husband and wife, then don't do it. So then I think those sorts of that kind of reasoning, that line of reasoning, is the kind of reasoning I think it would be sensible to pursue if you thought that that's what this verse was saying, and I'd be sort of happy to go along with that. But I just don't think that's what the verse is saying. I don't think that it is giving the husbands this license.
I mean, basically, what you just said is that even the classical scholars, right? They were showing social sensibility as well, in the sense that they understood how the society works and how this relationship works and what might or might not benefit it, and they weren't like just pushing one meaning forward, and then they were just telling people that you have the right to beat your wife.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's very clear that the hadith, the ayah is often discussed in the context of the Prophet ﷺ's own actions, of never striking his wife, of him saying that he wanted one thing. When there's this a sabab al-nuzul that's often mentioned alongside the ayah, that when it's revealed, the Prophet ﷺ is reported to say, "I wanted one thing, but God wanted another," which again sort of indicates that the rahmah of the Prophet ﷺ is such that there's the law, but it is something that he's himself would never do, would never countenance doing himself, and even the fact that the beating is itself qualified. There has to be the siwak and or it has to be ghayr mubarrih. None of that is evident from the ayah.
Yep.
The ayah doesn't say it has to be a light beating or that it has to be with a siwak, but those considerations were brought in precisely because I think the mufassirun and the fuqaha were they were conscious of the fact that this ayah is trying to accomplish a certain end, and that end is not going to be accomplished if it's taken in a certain way or if certain restrictions are put into place.
I mean, to someone with a modern sensibility, any implication or any indication that this means strike would simply be unacceptable, no matter how much it is watered down or no matter what kind of apologetic position is taken, and no matter what people say, a hadith says, they will simply refuse to even acknowledge this, because this seems to now be, in the times that we live in, seems to be completely unacceptable.
Yeah, and that's fine. People can have their opinion on that. But I think my endeavor in this piece of research was just to try and understand what the ayah is.
Right.
I'm not sort of putting forward legislative suggestions
right.
that a state should structure its a penal code in a certain way. That's not what I'm doing.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So Ahmed also has got some real questions, and I want to ask just one question, then I'll hand it over to them, and then we'll kind of try and dig deep further into the usage of words over here and how you've linked them. So let's start with the issue of Qawwam, right?
Yeah.
Right. No, sorry. Let's start with the issue of Nushuz. Now, you've significantly narrowed it down to sexual infidelity, right? And linking it with the obedience, that you said it doesn't make sense to you. But for me, when I look at it, sexual infidelity does not seem to gel with the idea of obedience. I mean, that's not an issue of obedience, right? Obedience, are the issues that the classical scholars are talking about. That goes along with obedience. Sexual infidelity goes along with something else altogether, right? You cannot, a husband cannot say to her wife, be obedient to me and don't commit sexual infidelity. So doesn't seem like that these two ideas coming together.
Well, I mean, if you look at, I think some of the both in the Jewish context and in some of the various hadith contexts, right, where this kind of issue is raised, it is to do with a husband telling his wife that, look, I'm not happy with so-and-so entering the house. Don't let so-and-so enter the house, right? I'm not happy with you being alone with so-and-so. Don't be alone with so-and-so. That exactly is khawf, and that khawf is resulting in the husband making a certain demand, right? And so the point is that the ayah is recognizing that, look, if you have this fear, then what do you need to do to be in a position where that fear is no longer a threat to you, right? Where you no longer feel that. What do you need to do for that fear to be dissipated? And what the husband will often need to do is to set some sort of boundaries, that I have this fear because X, so therefore I don't want you to do X. So it seems to me, both natural, and I think looking at, as I say, the surrounding narrations, plausible that the two could be linked.
Right. Right. I mean, you also showed two different ayats. There's another ayat which appears later where there are similar words where the ayat is talking about the husband, right? The Nushuz is coming from the husband, and you are kind of you're putting them together and saying, well, look, the structure is parallel, and then it has to mean the same thing. But when you say that the issue is the wife leaving the husband or the husband leaving the wife, that makes more sense when you put the two together, right? And you try and understand it. That makes more sense rather than sexual infidelity, because a wife or a husband can leave each other for many reasons, not just because they are interested in somebody else
Yeah.
or they are having an affair somewhere else. So that's not necessarily the only reason. They could be, trying to leave each other for many other reasons. In that case, if they start acting passive aggressively, and they start rebelling, and they start doing stuff to try and break this relationship, right? This is nushuz happening, and then there could be ways to mitigate it or somehow resolve it, or possibly even if it gets close to divorce, get other people involved, stuff like that. So those things make sense. Those things just make sense, and there's clear disregard for the Qawwam position as well over there. Sexual infidelity, not necessarily, right? Wife is going into sexual infidelity, flirting with somebody else, probably hanging out with the wrong people, and the husband is now just talking to her, and then separating the bed. That's exactly what she wants. Separating the beds, it's
I
it's
don't know
not
if that is
it's not going to actually
yeah.
achieve anything. You see, Mohammed?
Yeah. So I start to say a couple of things. So firstly, if we understand the shoes to mean, the husband or one spouse wanting to leave another spouse, right? And I think it's, as I say, I think that that meaning is there in Arabic literature, and it's, as I say, I think it's by euphemistic extension, just how in the same way that runaway in English, right, by euphemistic extension has these connotations of marital infidelity or cheating on the spouse. But I think your basic point that nushuz might mean a kind of a strong desire to leave the spouse. I think there is good evidence for that. The reason I don't think that the Quran is using it simply in that way, without this euphemistic extension, is that if you just take it to mean uh, a spouse wanting to leave their spouse, there's no punishment that's associated with that, right? So we already have to infer things. We already have to infer that, okay, it's not just a spouse wanting to leave, but it's also the actions that then go along with that. Some sort of a disruption, active sabotage to the marriage. But that again, then khawf doesn't fit, right? Then if nushuz means simply wanting to leave, there shouldn't be any punishment. If nushuz means actively sabotaging the marriage, then khawf doesn't fit, because that's again something you see, that you experience, and not something you fear. So I think in either of, for both of those reasons, I don't think that nushuz is being used in this non-euphemistic way. I think nushuz being used in the euphemistic way of sexual infidelity fits both the fact that there's punishment and the fact that khawf is used, and the idea that all it would just give the wife what she wants. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think you know if a wife is or if either spouse is um, committing infidelity, um, first of all, being confronted by that and being put in a position where the spouse says, "I refuse to share your bed with you," that is uh, can be psychologically very powerful. That shows the extent to which one spouse is has serious concerns over the other spouse's. And if this is something you're trying to hide, it's something you're trying to deny, then I think it has a real potential to shake someone. But beyond that, I think there's this additional motivation that again we sort of see in if we think of the Jewish background, that if the husband leaves the bed while fearing that the wife is engaged in sexual infidelity, then there's no danger of a lineage being confused, right? That if he genuinely fears that the wife is engaging in a sexual relationship with someone else, then there's pregnancies to consider, and there's kind of genealogy to consider. And by the husband removing himself from that situation, it's not just a case of punishment, it's also a case of, I think, a protection of lineage and protection of genealogy. And certainly from the, I think, it's been a while since I've looked into that. I'll have to refresh my mind, but I think certainly from the, or I think I put this in my paper somewhere, so I'd have to go read it again. But I think there's evidence from the Jewish perspective as well, that is one of the concerns that they have when they talk about the husband and wife's being separated.
All right. So, I mean, the certain things that you said over there, I want to kind of switch over to Ahmad. He's got, I'm sure that he's got a few questions around those issues, and then I'll come back later. So, Ahmad, over to you.
So, Assalamu alaikum. Um, it was fun to read your paper because I had to go back to Diwan al-Hamasa, which I studied last year. So having to go back was scary. Um, so it's, I think you laid it out perfectly when you just said that nushuz or nushuz, however you want to say it, it's euphemistically used to go away, or as you said, to run away. My question would I guess my first question would be, if we look at the word salah, for example, the essence of it is dua. But when you apply it, when you apply it in a Muslim context, it's always that person over there standing doing sajda, these things. So why, I know you said that there's an echo between the two ayat of Nushuz in 34 and I think 128, but why does that, is that really enough to say that they must mean the same thing? Because in 128 it also talks about the irad of the husband neglecting almost. So why, I mean, is it really necessary that they mean the same thing?
It's not necessary, but I think it's more likely than not, right? If you have a rare word used in the same surah in very similar constructions, I mean, the constructions are eerily, it's not just vaguely similar, the same vocabulary and the same topic. One spouse fearing the nushuz of another spouse, what do you do? And I think that given those intersections, the burden of proof for me would fall on those who want to say these mean entirely separate things. Because if we know anything now about surah structure, it's that surahs are very well structured, right? This is the way Quran scholarship has been going for the past century at least. The surahs are well structured. They have their own flavor in terms of their own sort of recurring motifs, right, that are unique to those surahs. They have sometimes their own vocabulary, which are unique to those surahs. So I think for me, even if these words occurred in disparate surahs, two separate surahs, I would still be inclined to think they must mean the same. The fact that they occur in the same surah, again, necessity, of course not. I can imagine a possible world in which they do mean entirely different things. But in terms of likelihood and where the burden of proof now lies, for me, the burden of proof now lies on anyone who wants to say that they must mean something, or they mean something different.
Yeah, when I
And
first
then,
read,
yeah, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, when I first read your paper, it was definitely that was one of the things that was, it was very clear. It kind of stood out to me. It's very, very interesting. But then the question asked, I was actually, we were, Raza Saab and I were just an hour before this, we were discussing with a student of, I guess he technically counts as a student of Imam Islahi about this, and his issue was twofold. First of all, and I'm just acting as the middleman here because he's not here right now, which is the use of the word takhafun. Now, he argues that takhafun is in the same meaning of ta'lamun, of knowing, and he uses his evidence is how it's used in other places in the Quran, like in Surah Baqarah, where it's فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ فَرِجَالًا أَوْ رُكْبَانًا. If you fear, then you can pray walking or on your mounts.
Why
And
does it
he
mean
says,
alimtum there?
because
Why can't it mean takhaf?
he says that the khawf there is the same way it's manifest, because I think the word used that the fear is vague in nushuz.
No. Wait, sir. The khawf in both places, I would say, is just khawf. فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ فَرِجَالًا أَوْ رُكْبَانًا. If you're afraid of enemy attack, then you can do this. Not if enemy is attacking you. If you're afraid they're about to attack you. So similarly, if you're afraid that there's some sort of sexual infidelity, not if you can see it. So in both places, I would say, khawf means khawf. Khawf means this is not something that's evident and happening and you're experiencing. Khawf is something that you're worried about.
Yeah, and I would intuitively agree with that. But then the second issue that he raises is that why is the first command fa'idhuhunna? Why is it that you warn? If there's issues of lineage, and if which I think should be seen as a, I think it should be seen as a major issue. If one of the issues is lineage, why isn't the first command fahjuruhunna fil madaji?
Because it depends on the level of the khawf, right? I think here it's sort of it's there's an extent to which this is left to the kind of the communal understanding. I mean, um, you know, if uh, I think if you have a marital situation, the degree to which one party might become suspicious of the other is going to vary depending on what's going on. And sometimes simply expressing that, look, I'm worried about this and I'm uncomfortable with this is all you need. Sometimes if you're going to go down the, your wife has spoken to someone and you're leaving her bed for that reason, that's a nuclear option, which is going to make things worse than if you'd adopted a gradualist approach. So I would say that the gradualism that the Quran suggests is, it's tying that gradualism to the level of khawf, which either spouse might be experiencing. And yeah, I think evidently, if the first time the husband encounters something to be suspicious of, if immediately all of the flags are red and there's little doubt in his mind what's going on, then sure, it makes sense for the wa'ad and the kind of the hijrah to happen at the same time. There's nothing in the ayah to kind of prevent that being the case. But generally, the way the ayah has been understood is that it's presenting a gradual approach. I think that's a sensible way to understand the ayah, and that also seems to be a sensible way to approach things if the khawf itself is slight and increasing over time.
Right, but in the farewell pilgrimage, it says if they come with a fahishatin mubayyina, and I think perhaps that may be a euphemism as they come with a pregnancy. I mean, doesn't have to be, but it could be. Then in the farewell pilgrimage, there is no fa'iduhunna. It's just fahjuruhunna fil madaji. So couldn't that be significant that over there it's mubayyana, so there's no reason, but here it's nushuz. Then you start with wa'ad.
Yeah, so I mean, it could the farewell pilgrimage isn't quoting the surah from beginning to end, but there are a significant number of intersections for it to be the case that it clearly has the surah in mind, or this ayah in mind. I mean, the number of intersections is so high that coincidence is no longer possible, right? So I think that's the first thing to establish. So that part of the farewell pilgrimage clearly has this ayah in the background. And then once we accept that, the initial, the opening gambit, right? The opening crime or the opening fear of Nushuz being replaced by Fahisha Mubayyana, I think makes very clear whether this is the Prophet ﷺ, it's a prophetic hadith, or if one is skeptical and says this is a hadith that's put into circulation later, that whoever said these words is clearly making an equation between the two. I think that what I'm saying is I'm not saying that that part of the farewell pilgrimage is verbatim quoting the ayah from beginning to end and replacing the word nushuz with fahisha. That's clearly not what's happening. What I'm saying is that there's a sufficient number of overlaps for it to be the case that they can't be coincidental. And given that that's the case, we can clearly infer that whoever said these words understood nushuz to be fahisha mubayyana.
Yeah, and I guess as you pointed out, that may be a misunderstanding of the narrator. That is also possible, I guess.
It's possible. It's possible. Yeah. I mean, I haven't looked at the various wordings and the various transmissions of that hadith. So yeah, I couldn't say more than that before doing that study.
Yeah,
But at least in this well-known wording of the hadith, you see this equivalence of nushuz and fahisha mubayyana.
yeah. If there's one thing no one can blame you of is not going in depth, so that's fine.
There's always more to be done.
But okay, so I think there's okay, so there's more things actually. So the issue with it's who is the doer, who is, I guess, the file of these verbs? Who is, so from what you said from the Umar ibn Khattab radhiyallahu anhu hadith, that fa'idhuhunna is the community, but
Yeah, it can
wahjuru,
be. It can be the
okay,
community.
okay,
Yeah,
so could it also be the husband?
could be. Yeah, sure. He's part of the community, right? Yeah. I think what happens in Surah, just as in the earlier ayah in Surah Nisa, where it's aduhuma, right? So you have to put yourself in a position. What was the community doing in between the revelation of Surah An-Nisa and Surah An-Nur, right? Because Surah An-Nisa identified a crime or identified an illicit action and prescribed that there should be punishment for it. Azuhuma. I mean, that much is clear in ayat sort of 15 and 16 or 14 and 15, whatever it was, right? Earlier in the surah. But it left it vague and didn't specify it until Surah An-Nur. So what was happening between those times is this sort of situation came up. And we don't know, but I think it's plausible that it was sort of left a little bit to the community until it was made clear. And I think the same thing may be true here in Surah 34, that we don't know exactly how this ayah was being implemented before its clarification in Surah An-Nur. So, yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible that there were people who took the Fadribuhunna to be an address to the husband. But I think, A, the context of that ayah itself doesn't support that it should be addressed to the husband. B, once Surah An-Nur is revealed, it's clear, I think, it's not an address to the husband. And C, the one hadith that we have of kind of this incident being implemented also supports that it's not an address to the husband. So all three things for me are pointing in the same direction.
Right, yeah. I mean, the issue that I was only thinking of was that
So
if you just take it from the hadith and that's the community n-
yeah,
taking away the husband, then wahjuruhunna only the husband can do. But then if you take fadribuhunna back to the ruling party, whatever, then it becomes a bit incoherent. That was my only concern.
yeah, no, yes, no, I understand what you're saying. So what I would say is the communal address, but as with any communal address, um, we understand communal addresses to be addressed not to not to be addressed to every single individual in the community, such that every single individual in the community is obliged to carry out all of the um, imperatives all at once, right? So if you address a group of people and say, guys, we need you guys need to sort out your marketing, your website, you guys need to sort out kind of flyers, right? What you're saying is that you're not happy with the situation. You as a community, this team is not doing these things well. So whoever's responsible for these different things, sort it out, right? That's how communal addresses work. So if you're addressing a community and you're saying, if this is the problem, if you as a community fear that a woman is engaged in issues, then you need to do these things. Then the question becomes who, right? So the ones who carry out any one of those individual acts are those people in the community for whom it is appropriate to do so. So for whom is it appropriate that they should admonish the wife? Anyone can do it. Why can't the sister of the wife do it, right? Why can't the wife's best friend do it, right? Why does it have to be the husband? Indeed, the husband could do it. But as we saw, the community leader could do it, right? Fahjuruna, it's clearly only the husband would do that, right? But then wadribuhunna, who is that addressed to? Who is it appropriate who is it appropriate that these individuals should carry out wadribuhunna? And what I'm saying is that A, it's not at all obvious from the ayah that this is addressed to the husband, because the rest of the ayah isn't addressed to the husband. The next ayah isn't addressed to the husband. So that's, if you say that this is the husband who's doing it, you're making an inference for which you need evidence. And B, once you take the Surah An-Nur ayat into consideration, just like fa'azuhuma isn't addressed to me or you, right? We can't go around punishing people guilty of fahisha. It's the judicial and executive powers within the community. Similarly, fadribuhunna, I would say, it should be thought of in exactly the same way. It's again the judicial and executive powers within the community who should do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I'd like to ask a question on this very point as well, because if we look at the ayah, I mean, specifically in the context of sexual infidelity, when you look at what is happening over the gradual process, which says faizu hunna, or and then it says wajru hunna and fil madaje, then it says wadribu hunna, right?
Yeah.
So you go through these three steps, and then you say then the relevant parties within the community are going to take action on those steps.
Right.
Relevant people can do was, and then they can try and convince a person to not do nushuz, and specifically nushuz who here means sexual infidelity. And then the husband can leave the bed, and then the comes back to the community or the relevant people in the community to then punish the person as well. But then after that, the ayat is saying, but if they obey you, seek no more means against them. That doesn't make any sense. Now you've gone to this
It doesn't.
extent. There's no point in kind of reconciling. Now sexual infidelity has happened. Punishment has been done. You you already indicated that in the second step, the husband is trying to protect himself as well, and also make sure that there's no doubt regarding the lineage of the child. If there is something that has already happened, and the fear has somehow materialized, then this the later part doesn't make sense at all. Then that advice seems to kind of go against what has already happened. Now you've already gone to beyond nuclear option. You've gone beyond nuclear
Yeah.
option, and now you're coming back. Okay, let's reconcile and let's be nice again. But if you obey,
But I don't think,
but if they
but no
obey
one
you,
understands. Yeah, no,
hmm,
but I think I would just be my understanding of that part of the ayah would be in line with, I think, the classical understanding, which
hmm,
is that this isn't the next step in the process, right? That this is to say that the process should be cut short, right? So that there's a process that is outlined in the Quran, but if at whatever stage the wife sort of does what is needed to do to assuage the husband's fears, assuming those fears are legitimate. I mean, there's a whole separate issue for what if those fears are illegitimate, but that's a separate issue. But assuming he has legitimate fears, as soon as she does whatever needs to be done to assuage those fears,
yeah,
that's it. You go no further. And clearly, ultimately it's the husband's fears that need to be assuaged, right? It's kind of what he feels needs to be done for this, for him not to have that concern anymore. So in that case, it is about to kind of kind of his concerns. So yeah, I would say that I think what I would say about that part of the verse is entirely in keeping with traditional scholarship, and I think is a plausible reading that this isn't the next step in the verse. It's simply saying cut this process off, and don't kind of hold grudges against them and seek further punitive measures against them if they're doing what needs to be done to kind of put the situation to bed.
so you're saying that the relevant people are going through these steps, and at any step, if they come back, if they obey, and if they
Yeah,
give up on whatever they're doing, just stop there and
you
do not
stop
seek
there.
any means.
So if the wa'az was, if the husband has some fears and he says, I don't want so and so coming to the house when I'm away from home, and if the wife accedes to that, the ayah is saying that's it. There's nothing more to be done here. Don't go beyond that. Don't seek punitive measures. Don't hold grudges. Reconcile be reconciled in your heart fully. I think that's how it would be traditionally understood. I don't think I'm saying anything radical there.
Okay.
So that can only happen after the wa'adh, right?
I mean, yeah, the point is that something has started. I mean, yeah, I mean, potentially, right? Even before Waz, if you're about to warn and she stops doing whatever then you stop doing Waz, right? But the point of that verse is that this whole process that's being outlined, there's a way out of it, and take that way out if you're given that opportunity.
Yeah, my thought was that
Hmm.
it could be that if after they had been flogged, then you should not further try to malign their character, further try to destroy them. But I think the فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ doesn't allow that.
Yes. فَاضْرِبُوا إِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ. Yes. Okay. If you understood, yes. Okay. So if one understands the ayat to say that, look, after you've done all of this, now they obey you, then leave them be. Then does it become difficult to see the fadribuhunna as relating to Surah An-Nur? Probably, yeah. I think if you understood in apartnakum to mean that, after this whole process has been carried out, yes, I have a better appreciation of your question, Raza, as well. If you understood in apartnakum to mean like after everything has been done, the judicial punishment has been carried out, or the li'an, the mutual cursing has been carried out. Now, if they obey you, don't seek your way against them. That probably wouldn't work, right? So I don't think that's what that's saying. So I think that's simply saying to cut the process off.
And there's one question, the last question I have, which when I asked to the other side, they have never given me a clear answer yet, which is, can you outline a situation, some situation that happens in which everything in this verse perfectly fits? The khawf fits, the wad fits, the hijra and the bed, the everything, the nushuz fits. All of these things fit. Like, just an example, that the wife did this, the husband did that. It's a slightly weird ask, but it's one that I haven't got a clear answer from the other side from.
No, but then hasn't he already taken a very, very specific position, which is saying that specific thing is sexual infidelity?
Yeah, but then the only reason I'm asking is because the khawf can become more clear, and the nushuz, like, just what can constitute as nushuz, because I think as humans, unless we have an example, it becomes difficult to understand theoretically.
So I think you get examples which are actually very good in both in the rabbinic literature and in Hadith literature, right? And in the farewell pilgrimage. So one that gets mentioned again and again is the wife allowing someone whom the husband doesn't approve of to come to a house in his absence. If the husband is uncomfortable with that, that's the beginning of some very serious khawf in the shoes, right? If the husband saying, look, I know this person, I don't like this person has a reputation, I don't like the way he speaks to you, I don't like where this is going. What I'm saying is, when I'm not home, I don't want that guy coming and you guys being alone. That's a very human situation, a very real situation, and I think one that requires a great deal of delicacy. And I think one that is very plausibly the kind of situation that the Quran is addressing here.
No, but then that person could be anybody, right? That person doesn't not necessarily need to be somebody that the husband suspects that that person might try and seduce his wife. And in this case, he's not actually suspecting his wife; he's suspecting the person who's coming in, because he's saying to his wife, "Don't let."
Right? But it takes two to tango, right?
No. Eventually, some hanky-panky might happen. What I'm trying to say is that what if we go by the word that the husband fears something, and you're saying that the one clear example is that the husband says to the wife, "Don't allow this person to come in," or I don't want him to be come to my house when I'm not there, right? Then there's the husband is actually suspecting that person rather than necessarily the wife, because at this moment,
right,
he thinks that the wife is not guilty, right? And the person
but
has intentions.
For example, if that's already happened a couple of times, right? If that's already happened, but that's all that's
then the husband is going to do was, right? It doesn't make sense.
Why would you not do was? If someone's come around to his house in his absence, and he has absolutely no evidence that anything happened other than these two were alone for a period of time, I mean, what's he going to do? He's going to take the nuclear option. He was alone with you, therefore I'm divorcing you, therefore I'm taking you to court. What's he going to do other than was? Please don't do this again.
All right. So, I mean,
I mean,
Yeah.
clearly you could divorce her, right? That option there for
No,
both
no, that
parties,
option is always
right?
there. Actually,
But
that
if you
option
want
is
to,
always there, and
sure,
for both husband and wife,
exactly,
if they want to just leave, they can always take the leave option. But if you know,
absolutely,
yeah,
yeah,
but if you notice the prior verses, God does talk about it. If you've given women certain gifts, you are not going to take them back because it's going to be injustice, and so there is certain kind of monetary or financial issues involved in there as
sure,
well, right?
sure,
So
yeah,
whoever goes for the divorce option, whether the woman or the man, they'll have to then pay for it in a sense.
yeah. There are financial consequences, sure,
There are financial consequences to it, and
for divorce.
if the wife wants to leave and she goes for the khula option, then she would have to probably give up certain things, right? So
Very
they,
possibly, right? Yeah,
because we are only
yeah,
talking about it in the kind of husband wife interaction terms, but of course there are
yeah.
monetary issues involved as well.
Sure, sure. No, you're quite right. I agree with all that. But what I'm saying is that what the verse is saying is speak to your wives, right? Like have this conversation. And it seems that if there's a situation that has arisen that you don't want to arise again, because you're uncomfortable with it, that seems like good advice.
All right, so I mean, okay, so
Yeah.
let's accept that, but connected to my previous question, just like when I looked at the three steps where relevant people are doing the vase, and the husband is leaving the bed, and then the relevant people are doing the punishment, right? After that, God is saying, well, if she obeys, then don't find any other, but don't do anything
Yeah.
else against her. But in the
Right.
next verse, it's clearly going to the society, and it's saying, then if you fear that they're going to go for divorce, then try and appoint people, and try and
Yeah.
resolve this issue, right? In 35.
Yeah. Yeah. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقَ بَيْنِهِمَا.
But
Yeah.
then that does not kind of again sit well with the three steps. It seems like the three steps have happened, and now people are talking about other people getting involved to do this reconciliations. Now it seems like the order is not working out, because God could have said, do vows, and separate their beds, then ask people to get involved, and then God could talk about, clearly something has gone beyond what was permissible, and now
But
there
there's
are two
no.
options. Now there are two
Yeah.
options. One is that the husband is a sole witness, or the husband has a very strong suspicion, and the husband goes for the curse option. And if that is not the case, if he has four witnesses, then he goes for the punishment option, and then he takes her to court. In that order, those things might make sense. It seems like
Yeah.
the three options have happened. Then God is saying, don't try to take any other action against her. Then other people are getting involved, and then they're trying to do reconciliation just before divorce.
Yeah.
So that order again does not seem to work with this sexual infidelity thing.
Right. But verse 35 isn't talking. There's nothing in there to suggest it's talking about nushuz. I mean, this is talking about shiqaq bainihima, right? It's not. It's an assumption that this is talking about a continuation of the nushuz case. But I don't think
But
that
no,
mentions.
I'm just talking about Nushuz here. I'm talking about the consequences of what has happened, and then that getting to a point where they are close to divorce, and that's where the society, or the community is intervening, and they are
Yeah.
trying to kind of reconcile them. But that makes
Exactly.
sense in that order, right? It's not just
No,
about
but I mean,
Nushuz.
but shiqaq, the fear of divorce can happen for all sorts of reasons that might be connected to nushuz, but that might have nothing to do with nushuz, right? And the ayah 35
But
is talking.
isn't the previous ayah and the things that are being described over here, they are leading up to divorce? Isn't that
That that
it's describing a household which is in disorder, which is in chaos,
yeah.
and what is the next step? It is going to dissolve, and that is where the community intervenes.
Yeah, so I agree that um you could look at this as, yeah, I see no reason to kind of push back against that. I think that um it is talking about community intervention, and that community intervention could very possibly be connected to what happens with nushuz, but I'm saying it's not necessary, right? Shiqaq can happen as a result of what's happening in this kind of nushuz process unfolding, but it can happen independent of that as well. So one doesn't have to see that ayah as giving the next step. It could be independent advice, which can be taken completely outside of a nushuz context. It can be taken parallel with the nushuz context. I don't see the need to kind of say that the ayah is saying first you do these 4 things and then you do this. It's giving, I think, advice which is applicable in a broader scenarios, in a broader range of scenarios.
Yeah, Raza Saab, I think
Yeah.
you're encountering is you're assuming the Huma in Ayah 35 is referring to the same people in 34. I think that's the assumption, the crux of the assumption.
I'm just thinking about it as a reader. If I'm reading ayat 34 and then I'm going to 35, I'm seeing a flow over here, and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is how God is telling us to kind of go about this. Husband and wife are trying to resolve it somehow. It doesn't work out. Go to the community, and then they try and resolve it. Doesn't work out. Well, then there's final option of divorce or khula and the,
Yeah, and
and the
that assumes that the takhafun is talking to the men, not society in general. So it
no, that's
depends
what
on
I'm
the
saying. See, that's what
situation.
I'm saying. That's what I'm saying in more of the classical understanding, and in more of the understanding where it's not just sexual infidelity. Um, this flow makes sense, but when we go for very specific options like sexual infidelity, and the people addressed here are not the husbands but the relevant people in the community, then it becomes a bit confusing to me. And then I would have to then take Saqib's explanation on this, which is it is not necessarily a continuation of it. It is an independent thing which can be in parallel, which can be entirely separate, or which can be possibly in continuation.
Yeah. I think I think that whichever position you stake out, it will have knock-on effects, right, in terms of how
Yeah,
you read the rest of the verse.
right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are coming to 90 minutes, which we agreed with Saqib. If you have any final questions, Ahmad, if you can just ask them, and then we'll wrap it up and thank Saqib.
No, that's perfectly clear. Very well argued. It's great.
All right. So
Barakallahu feekum.
I hope, Saqib, you kind of found this discussion useful.
It was wonderful. Barakallahu
We
feekum.
try
Thank
to
you so
push
much.
back as much as possible. We try to
Good.
challenge you on your position, and
Good.
and hopefully you'll give us time in future as well, and
Inshallah.
we'll be able to kind of, if you want to discuss the issue of financial maintenance, and why you go with that minority position, we can discuss that. And in future, if you are available, we'd like to discuss other papers that you've written with you as well.
I'm at your service. Allah
All
yabarak
right then.
feekum.
Sounds good. And so with that, I'd like to thank you, Saki, for the time that you gave us, and for enlightening us on with your research.
Barakallahu feekum. Barakallahu feekum. Remember in your du'as, inshallah.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Walaikum assalam.